Welcome to What We Made Possible, the podcast where we explore the power of healing and driving change for advocates, leaders, and changemakers. The conversations here draw the connection between creating new possibilities in the world, possibilities of care, of belonging, of thriving for our communities, with stories of personal healing and loving relationship building. I'm your host, Patty Daylight, leadership coach for social change. I spent a decade in nonprofits, government, and DEI, securing 6- and 7-figure opportunities for communities of color. And I've experienced firsthand the transformative power of compassion, healing, and belonging in making a bigger impact. Let's dive in. Hi, all. Welcome back to What We Made Possible. Today, I really want to talk about the skill of compassion. And I think it's a really crucial skill in terms of leadership, especially for folks in the nonprofit world or socially responsible world or like any kind of leadership position where you're trying to make change, when you're trying to make a shift, especially for women of color. Because if we are trying to make change in the world, right? If we're trying to change the world, then the world that we are trying to create, I'm going to assume, is one that is compassionate, right? That there is healing, that there's resilience, there's deep, meaningful change. And I always say, if we're going to create change in the world, then we also have to practice that change. So we have to have compassion for ourselves, for our colleagues, for our loved ones, for the people who maybe we don't love as much in the world. And we're going to talk about compassion today. I'm going to debunk some myths. I'm going to talk about why it's important. I'm going to talk about why we don't necessarily have this skill. It's not necessarily a skill that women of color have built in the context of leadership, in the context of coalition building, which is a lot of the work that I do. And we're going to talk about how do we even do that? Like, how do we build this skill? So I'm going to give you a little practice at the end. But let's start here, right? When it comes to your leadership, what got you to where you are today? With all of the shifts in the last several years, even though we've, collectively disinvested from DEI in 2024, very different from 2020. Even with all of that, maybe you're finding yourself in a new position. Maybe you've been promoted. Maybe you even started your own organization. And maybe you got here with grit, sacrifice, maybe even like sheer force of will. You grit your teeth and you bear it because it feels like there's just a little bit further before that next due date, right? You hustle through projects. You say yes to impossible deadlines. You lose sleep. This was me, for sure. And at the end of the day, what was that work for? In my context, it was so that my boss could go on vacation knowing that my project is taken care of, which means that when she would come back from vacation, she felt good about promoting me. I mean, I earned the positions that I made. And let's be real, like you earned where you're at. But like I can literally hear the cortisol running through your veins. I can imagine that cortisol that used to run through my veins when I was working in these leadership positions in government, in nonprofit, on Broadway. I could feel that today, thinking back to those moments. So tell me this, are you still skipping lunch to send that one last email? Have you gotten to 3 p.m. and realized you haven't had water all day? All that urgency, all that like, let me just hold off on taking care of myself so that I can get this task done. All that urgency leaves scars. And if you have enough of those scars, then you get to burnout. But there's a different way, right? Like you didn't get here to work harder. You fought for this position, created this position for yourself. You worked to get here so that you can have more freedom, that you can have more agency, so you can have a bigger impact, which means that you're going to have to shift how you do things. You're going to have to actively fight against things like white supremacy culture, which loves urgency. You're going to have to put humans first. And that's what I mean by compassion, is putting humans first. So what is that, right? What is compassion? I'm going to get a little bit woo-woo, but stay with me. Real compassion is based in the experience, in the belief that we are not separate, right? I am a part of the body, the larger body of the universe. Things that are like we might be separate, we might think of as separate, are actually a part of me. I am not separate from the child in Gaza. I am not separate from Beyonce. I am not separate from Donald Trump. We are both human, right? And so when it comes to self-compassion, any part of you that you try to distance yourself from, try to make yourself better than, self-compassion, and I'm talking about when it comes to ourselves, right? Self-compassion is about reconnecting to that part. I'm not saying that I'm going to go out and do the same things that MAGA folks are trying for, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is a part there that is still connected to me, that we still have the same like blood running through our veins. We are trying to achieve wholeness, wellness, love, thriving for our communities. We have different ideas, obviously, of what that looks like. Very, very different ideas. But that separation is what allows us to create things like the genocide in Gaza. So we got a little bit woo, we got a little bit political. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a suffering that is created through separation. There's a suffering that is created when I try to put myself above, or when I try to distance myself from a part that is within myself. Because if I recognize a hate in another person, I also have that hate in myself. And we bring it back to ourselves. We bring it back to ourselves. So when we practice self-compassion, especially towards the parts of us that we hide or we're ashamed of, that part kind of softens. It feels safe to release because we feel seen. It's like there's this trick that teachers use in the classroom where if like all the kids are raising their hands at the same time, like let's say you have 3 kids raising their hand at the same time, and they're all trying to be seen, they're all trying to jump up and down and like tell you the answer, then you say their 3 names and you acknowledge them, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm good. That's what I mean by softening, right? Like it feels safe because you're then seen. And when we do that, when we are able to then connect back to those parts, it does not mean that we have to act from those places. We don't act from hate. We don't act from separation. When we bring those parts back to us, then we can actually trade them in. So we trade in that urgency, that fear, that disconnectedness, that defensiveness, that extraction of white supremacy culture. And we trade that in for connection, we trade that in for love, and we trade it in for change. So when we practice compassion with others, what we are saying is, you and I, we're connected. That means compassion, more than anything, is the way to liberation. And by the way, I've been practicing yoga for over a decade now. I'm trained and have taught in several studios. For all the yoga practitioners out there, this is why compassion or nonviolence, they say ahimsa in Sanskrit, that's foundational for the yoga philosophy and the practice. It's so not about like trying to put yourself in a weird pretzel with your body. That's not the point. The point is to be compassionate and to practice that and do the thing that is going to support you, right? It's so foundational. Ahimsa is so foundational to yoga that it's the first yama, right? It's the first duty as described in the different limbs of yoga, in the 8-limb path of yoga. So this is not just, me spewing my random opinions. When I say compassion is foundational in leadership, I mean compassion is a foundational practice for being a human. And one of the ways that we are human is when we are at work or when we are leading a movement, when we are creating something in the world. We have to be human in that too. But why don't we, right? So why don't women of color experience compassion or have this skill in the context of leadership? It's because we lead based on the examples that we receive. It's not valued. Compassion is not a value of predominantly white institutions. It's not a value of predominantly white industries or our culture generally, and I'm talking about American culture. We value profit over people, and then we tell ourselves it's the right thing to do. I've literally been in meetings where the executive has said, it's either we make this shitty decision with this really shitty impact on people, or we have to lay everybody off. They make this false dichotomy between task and relationship, right? It's either we are compassionate towards people or no one has a job. And I have literally been in boardrooms where that has been said. And so having been in those spaces, why would I have that skill? It was not taught to me. It was not valued. It's definitely not, in annual reviews. How compassionate are you, right? But if we are, right, trying to create change in the world, then actually compassion is useful, even though it's not something that we have practiced. I work with a lot of coalitions, and, a coalition is a group of people or a group of organizations. They all have their different mission statements, but when you're in coalition, you're coming together for one larger goal, whether it's to pass a piece of legislation or there's a issue that's bigger than your one agency or your one organization or you individually can address. So you come together, right? You coordinate efforts, you're making sure that no one is duplicating unnecessarily, that people aren't doing the same thing and competing against each other for funding or other resources, right? You make sure that you are working together. Coalition building is all about building collective power. So how do you do that? How do you build collective power? How can you do something together if y'all don't like each other? Or if you're just trying to push through, or you're just trying to grit through and grind your teeth and just do the thing, that's actually why so many coalitions are unsustainable. And so when we bring compassion into the context of coalition building, there's so many things that it does. It creates this foundation of mutual respect, of mutual trust, of understanding and empathy. Because when you're a group of people coming together, it's very often you don't have the same exact experiences and the same exact perspectives. But if you have this foundation of trust, this foundation of respect, this foundation of compassion, then if you're trying to pass a piece of legislation or if you're trying to accomplish something together, then you know you got each other, right? And that's because compassion helps to bridge divides. cultural, ideological, socioeconomic. It brings people together towards a common goal. And I always say, like, it's okay to be different as long as our differences don't mean that you think that I should be harmed, right? That's the difference between like me and Donald Trump, for example. And so members in a coalition, if there is compassion, you are more likely to feel valued. You're more likely to feel heard. You're more likely to collaborate, to innovate, to create sustainable and impactful changes. And it's the same whether you are working in a group of organizations in coalition or you're working with your own team. When everyone feels valued and heard, you actually get more shit done. You don't get shit done when people don't trust each other, right? When you're just in conflict all the time. And not to say that you're avoiding conflict, but to have a foundation of compassion and a foundation of mutual respect and understanding means that even if there is conflict, you can figure it out together. So it turns adversaries into allies by genuinely acknowledging concerns, by encouraging active participation, right, in coalition efforts. Because when you have that foundation, you can look at a concern and know it's not because of any individual being shitty. It's because y'all are on the same team. And so compassion strengthens coalition and amplifies its voice. And honestly, like compassion just allows us to connect with more people because when you're working in coalition, when you are working on a team with different people, you're going to be diverse, hopefully. And each person is going to bring their strength, right? Each person is going to bring their stuff too, their trauma, their whatever. And so compassion allows us to connect and really harness that strength while also recognizing that like humans are going to human. I have this compassionate planning framework with my clients. I teach them how to do project planning from a compassionate place. And it's really about putting relationship before task. So, what I said earlier about being in executive board meetings where they're trying to make a decision between relationship and task, right? Do we value the people or do we value like this organization existing? That's a false dichotomy. It's when I say relationship before task, I mean, I don't mean to say that the task is not going to happen. And that's a myth, I think, of like when I try to say compassion is a leadership skill, I have gotten that pushback to say, well, if we're compassionate, then like nothing's going to get done. But like I said earlier, actually, we get more done. And this isn't to value the task just for its own sake either, right? Like, we don't dream of labor here in this space either. But like, we're trying to make a change in the world. In order to do that, and this is beyond work, this is beyond career, even. Like, if you are trying to do something for your community, then you put that relationship before the task. Compassion is a healing tool, right? It's a tool to lead in a different way. It's an invitation to resist the narratives of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of extraction. It's a way to push back against that, of decolonizing the way that we lead, and for creating a space for wholeness and for care. Because if our organizations and our teams can really have that culture of wholeness and care, then imagine what we can create. So, how do we do this, right? Like how do we even practice compassion? So, I'll give you two practices, very similar. One is around self-compassion, and then the other is around having compassion for others. So, self-compassion. First, what is one mean thing you say to yourself? Well, I'll give you an example. I am a procrastinator. I love to procrastinate. I am so good at it. And I'm also so good at beating myself up for it. So I'm going to take that example, right, of beating myself up for procrastinating. And then I'm going to imagine that any of those thoughts associated with procrastinating are coming from a little kid, like in the voice of a little kid, snitching on their younger sibling. So I'm an oldest daughter. I have a younger brother who's 6 years younger. I'm also the oldest granddaughter on one side of my family and the oldest girl on the other side of my family. So, I wasn't a snitch, but like I know this voice very well, right? So that voice, right? She shouldn't have procrastinated. Like, shouldn't she get in trouble? Like, ooh, like, look what you did, right? Imagine that those thoughts that you're having, those mean thoughts, are coming from a little kid snitching on their younger sibling. And then allow yourself to just soften, right? Understand from her point of view, she's just pointing something out, right? Like her little sister made a mistake, her sibling made a mistake. But you, as the adult in this situation, you also see the perspective of the little sister, right? She's just trying her best. And then you talk to yourself the way you would talk to these siblings. Because one way that you can practice compassion, self-compassion, is to recognize that it's sometimes selves compassion, meaning you have different parts of you. So you talk to yourself the way you would talk to these different parts, these two different siblings, if you will. So something like, I still have time to do it. Something like, I still have time to rest. Even if this week is hard, I can get through it. I can trust my gut. I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed, and it's okay to feel that way, right? Even like my voice softened, I could feel my shoulders soften as I do that. And actually, if there's something that I'm procrastinating on, as I soften, it actually makes it easier to do that thing. So, the practice of self-compassion. Step 1, take a step back from that uncompassionate thought. Imagine that they're coming from a little snitch. Step 2, see if you can understand where that little snitch is coming from and see if you can understand the perspective of their younger sibling who they are telling on. Step 3, allow yourself to soften. Step 4, talk to yourself the way that you would talk to those siblings. And then step 5 is to take action from that place. So that's self-compassion. You can use this same practice when practicing compassion with other people, right? Connecting to the part of you that is not feeling particularly compassionate. Maybe they're feeling judgmental. And then also taking a step back and understanding where that other person is coming from. Because one of the most impactful things that I learned from my coaching training is that everything that we do, every feeling that we have, every emotion that we sense has a positive intention. So what's that positive intention that you can find? Like, what's a positive intention of procrastination? For me, for example, it's like wanting to get it right. What's the positive intention of whatever your team member is doing while they're fucking up? Or whatever conflict you're in. What's the positive intention of that other person coming in with this? And what's your intention as you're coming into this? We can have compassion while also upholding a level of excellence, a level of accountability. We can do both, right? Like we can absolutely create a world where we've made the changes that we want to make and we've taken care of each other along the way. But that's only possible if we build the skill in the meantime. So, to recap, compassion is a form of healing. It's a leadership skill that creates space for sustainability. It creates space for resilience. It creates space for genuine connection, which is the game changer when it comes to making real change. I invite you to practice that self-compassion, and I invite you to practice compassion in your interactions with other people. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to What We Made Possible. I really hope this episode resonated. As a coach, I always end with action steps, and so I invite you to do something, which is to pause and ask yourself, what resonated? What am I taking away? And what's possible for me and my community now? If you liked this conversation, please leave a review and a rating. It helps so much. Thanks again.